I'm going to tell, I decided, thinking about what to tell this morning, I thought, well, it's summer. I tried to think of something as summer in my past. All my stories are about memories of mine. I don't tell traditional stories, or I tell very few stories even about my personal life. I guess I don't have enough perspective. But, one reason I tell them is Spalding Gray said, the best way to reincarnate yourself is through your story. Well, I sort of reversed that. The best way to reincarnate others is through my telling a story about them. And Wednesday was the 37th anniversary of my mother's dying, which is always a sad day for me. And I tell stories about my mother, and I like to think about her because, as Dolores and Mary Alice here know, she was quite a character. And so this is a story about my early relationship with my mother. And it's also about a trip that I took the summer. I was 11 years old. I took by myself. I had never, before this trip, spent the night away from home that I couldn't walk home, like I might go spend the night with a girlfriend or something, but never been far away because Mama wouldn't even let me go to summer camp or anything like that. But it was the summer after my 6th grade, and my 6th grade year had been absolutely horrible. I had started the 6th grade thinking I was okay, everything was all right, I was fine, had friends, doing okay. But I had a simply terrible teacher that year. Really, I think she hated me and tried to make my life miserable. Her name was Mrs. Deadman. I called her Dead Man because she was just so vile. And I have a lot of stories about her, but we'll save those for another time. But I got out of the 6th grade feeling like I was no longer okay. I had become, and one thing I learned in the 6th grade was there's such a thing as popularity. I had never known that before, and I learned that in the 6th grade, and I learned at the same time that I wasn't popular. I didn't look or act like the other girls. I didn't seem to belong. I was one of those misfits. And I blamed that all on my mother. She was, at that time, I felt she determined my life and what it was. She picked out my clothes, to wear. She determined my hairstyle. She really much, I was just 11, so she pretty much had made all the major decisions in my life. And we had begun to have some really big fights. Prior to this year, the 6th grade, and we had gotten along beautifully. I accepted and loved my mother. I thought she was just the most beautiful person in the world. But I was beginning to think that she was holding me back. And it was she was the reason I wasn't popular. We fought about 2 things, mainly clothes. I really wanted to look like the other girls looked. So I remember one time we went shopping and I saw this outfit. It was a fabulous, cute outfit. In fact, the girl across the street, who was a popular girl, had this outfit. So I went over and said, Mom, isn't this great? Wouldn't this look wonderful on me? And she looked at it and she said, well, doesn't Mary Ann have one just like that? I said, I know, but I'll look so good in it. She said, what is the matter with you? Why would you want to wear something that somebody else has? She said, I don't want to see myself coming and going. Don't you want to stand out from the others? I said, no, that's the problem. I do stand out from the others because I don't look like them. So we fought over my clothes. And the other thing we fought a lot about, seems silly now, but we thought about the fact that she wouldn't let me shave my legs. We could not wear pants to school back then. This was 1950, 54, 55, when I was 11, 54. We had to wear skirts. And I had very hairy legs hanging out from my skirts. And all the other girls had begun to shave their legs. Well, I just felt that was horrible. In addition, I'd always had sort of hairy arms. I'd always been very self-conscious of the hair on my arms. So I felt this was one reason that I wasn't popular and I wasn't happy, was Mama wasn't letting me shave my legs. We had a lot of knockdown, drag out fights that year. But interestingly enough, at the end of the 6th grade, I was so glad to get out of that class. Mama had decided that she was going to send me to just outside of Washington, D.C. to visit my Aunt Nina Jo for 3 weeks. 3 weeks. I was just ecstatic. First, Nana Jo was my father's youngest sister by far. She was quite a bit younger than my father. She was just 12 years older than I was. So when I was a young child, she was around a lot in town, and I thought she was so cool. The first thing is she was a drummer in the high school band. So she got to wear that uniform and play the drums. I have a picture of her with her snare drum slung across her shoulder. And she had a horse named Ginger that she let me ride on, and other kinds of things. She was always joking and laughing. And Nana Jo did have a reputation for being a bit of a trickster, playing pranks on people, which when I was a kid, that seemed okay. But she had, after high school, she'd moved to Washington, where her mother was living at the time, and she had a couple sisters up there. So she met her husband, her future husband, Bill. They got married. He was a former Marine, and they had a little son. He was about 2 at this time. And they had moved from Washington to Clinton, Maryland. Well, all I knew was that I was going to visit Nana Jo, and in my mind, because we had visited Washington many times, I had the image of an urban environment, a place with a lot of things to do, shopping, excitement, different things. When I got to Clinton, Maryland, I drove up there with another aunt and uncle, great aunt and uncle. It was nothing like I thought. First, I don't know what it's like today, but in 1954, it was like being out in the country. There was nothing there, really. Nothing. It was not like Washington. There were no shops, no tall buildings, no excitement. There weren't any sidewalks. They had no sidewalks in Clinton, Maryland. And they let their dogs run loose. Worse, they burned their garbage. So there I was, stuck out kind of in the country with my Aunt Nana Jo and her son. Bill went to work every day. I didn't have a bicycle because I was used to a lot of freedom. I could get on my bicycle and go anywhere I wanted to in town. I could go with my friends to the Y to go swimming. We could go to the library. We could go to the movie theater. We could be gone all day and nobody would worry about us. But my aunt wouldn't let me out of her yard, and I didn't want to go out of her yard because anytime I even went in the yard, the next door neighbor's dog came and charged me. And so I was sort of confined and imprisoned inside. But the first week was really nice in so many ways because one, Nana Jo didn't care what I wore. I could change my clothes several times a day if I wanted to. And she didn't, we just had an easygoing relationship. She was very much pregnant at that time with her second child. And I spent a lot of time helping her with chores, things that I wouldn't have done for my own mother, by the way. I would have balked at or fussed at, but I did happily for Nana Jo. I hung out the wash. Remember when we hung out wash on a clothesline? And I helped her clean up the kitchen. But most of all, I kept Billy, her son, entertained. He was so cute. He was about 2 years old, 2.5 maybe. He had red hair, and we had a wonderful time that summer. I had a little brother, so he was like my surrogate little brother. And I played with him all day. There was no television, by the way. I was used to also having a TV. There was no TV. Nana Jo and her husband, Bill, were somewhat poor in a way, trying to just get started. And so we had radio. So Billy and I, that's the son, listened to radio all day. And I began to teach him when certain songs came on, I began to teach him to dance, kind of the way I would dance, just moving in time with the music. And we had a good time, and he loved it, and he laughed and giggled, and it was so much fun. Our favorite song that summer was The Yellow Rose of Texas. Does anybody remember when that was popular? It was like hugely popular, and it came on several times a day on the radio. So whenever it would come on, we would just dance around the house, and we would pretend to be playing the drums. And it was just fun. That was my entertainment that first week. My aunt also spent some time teaching me. This is funny. We still laugh at this. She taught me how to make grilled cheese sandwiches. Now, I know that sounds weird. I had never had a grilled cheese sandwich when I got up there. I'd had toasted pimento cheese sandwiches, which is what we ate in Salisbury. We did not get this American cheese, grilled cheese. It was toasted pimento cheese. So she taught me to make it in a cast iron skillet with the butter, and I couldn't wait to get home to show my brother what I had made. She also taught me to make an applesauce cake. So I had fun that first week, and we were everybody was getting along great, and I didn't have one iota of homesickness. Toward the end of the week, though, I was beginning to get a little bored. I kept thinking, well, I wonder what Mary Ann's doing today. I wonder if she went to the Y to go swimming. What about my brother? Did he go to did Mama take him to the movie? What are they doing there without me? And do they miss me? Do they miss me? But I thought, well, in 1 week out of 3 weeks, I was 1/3 of the way through, and I had a big event coming up the following week that I was looking forward to. It was going to be my 12th birthday in the middle of July. And I couldn't wait. And I just was so eager because, being 12 is just 1 year short of being 13, which back then was kind of a big milestone for us. So I couldn't wait for my birthday. Finally, my birthday rolled around, and Nana Jo had made a cake. She had invited a couple of her and Bill's friends, another couple over. I didn't know them, but that was okay, to celebrate. And she had a cookout, and we had a cake. And it was just me and Billy and Nana Jo and Bill and this other couple. At the end of the dinner, Nana Jo said, well, Dottie Jean, we're going to play a game now. She said, it's kind of like pin the tail on the donkey. I thought, pin the tail on the donkey? Doesn't she realize I'm 12 years old now? I am not going to play pin the tail on the donkey. She said, I said, well, really, I don't think she said, you'll love it. It's so much fun, she said. And so she said, it's called Goose the Moose. And she said, she had took me in the kitchen where on the refrigerator was a big poster on which she had drawn the rear end of a moose with an actual asshole, if I may say so, right in the middle of that back end of the moose, and a tail, sort of. And she said, now what we're going to do, we're going to blindfold you, turn you around a couple of times, and we want you to point your finger and walk toward that moose and see if you can hit that hole in the middle of that picture. She said, I'll have Bill do it first so you can see how it's done. So she put a blindfold on my Uncle Bill and twirled him around a couple of times, and he stuck out his hand with the finger pointing, the finger had to be pointing, toward the moose. Well, he went off in another direction completely. I thought, what is the matter with him? He has no sense of direction. So it came my turn, and I was, of course, determined to do better than Bill. See, it was a competition now. It showed that I had a better sense of direction. So Nana Jo blindfolded me and put that, circled me around. And she said, okay, Dottie Jean, put your hand out and your finger, see if you can reach that circle there in the middle of the picture. So I did, and I was moving forward, and suddenly I heard this giggling and snickering. And I thought, gosh, if I made the same mistake Bill made, am I wandering off in a different direction? Surely Nana Jo would stop me if there was something, if I was about to do something embarrassing or do something wrong. And I kept going, and suddenly my finger went into something warm and squishy and horrible feeling. And I just started crying, and I didn't know what had happened, and everybody was laughing uproariously. And Nana Jo saw that I was really upset, and she took off the blindfold. She said, oh, Dottie Jean, it's okay. It's nothing. It's just some pudding I made up. And she showed me this coffee cup full of some kind of chocolate pudding that I had stuck my finger into. I couldn't believe it, and they thought it was so funny. I was so embarrassed. And as somebody who was just that day had turned 12, I didn't get it. I didn't get exactly. I knew it was something horrible and humiliating, but I didn't really get what I was symbolically was doing with Goose the Moose. I just knew I had made a fool of myself in some way. And I was the butt of the joke that evening. I was so upset. You know how you feel hot all over, and you just want a hole to open up and swallow you? That's what I wanted at that time. Well, shortly after that, and I was so miserable, and the phone rang, and Nana Jo went to answer it, and she came back and she said, Dottie Jean, it's a person-to-person call for you. Now, some of you will not remember these things, but used to be long distance, you could make person-to-person calls so that if you didn't reach the person, you weren't charged. So I went to answer, and the operator said, is this Dottie Jean Kirk? And I said, yes. She said, I have a person-to-person call for you. And then I heard my mother's voice say, happy birthday, Dottie Jean. And I was so glad to hear from her, and so thrilled that she'd called, and so especially glad that she had rescued me from that room where those adults had been snickering at me, where I'd made such a fool of myself. And I said, oh, Mama, please, you and Daddy drive up here tomorrow. Please come get me. I got to go home. I can't stay here. No, I just can't stay here. She said, well, Dottie Jean, what's wrong? She said, oh, they just played a terrible game and I was the butt of the joke and they're all laughing at me and everything. And she said, well, your daddy and I can't drive up there tomorrow. And you're halfway through. You can make it. You can make it. And I don't know, maybe she asked to speak to Nana Joe or whatever, but that was the end of the call. But I changed a lot. That was one beginning of the change. Right then, suddenly, Nana Joe wasn't cool anymore to me. Not cool at all. And I was so upset and had my hopes for the summer in some way dashed because it just wasn't working out the way I had wanted. I had wanted to go there and be changed and come back a popular girl. I thought maybe even Nana Joe would let me shave my legs, which of course she wouldn't, not without my mother's permission, but I didn't want to be there anymore. So the next week and a half really were pretty miserable for me. I'm kind of moody, to say the least, and I was in a bad mood and I was feeling just miserable. And I didn't want to dance with Billy anymore. And he would come and ask me to dance and our songs would play, but I just didn't want to. I just wanted to sit and read and just be myself. And I know that Nana Joe noticed because one day when Billy was taking his afternoon nap, she came in and she said, Dottie Jean, I want to talk to you for a minute. I said, okay. She said, have you started having your monthly periods? And I said, no, why? She said, well, sometimes when women are about to get their period, they get moody and they feel kind of blue and down. And I just thought maybe that was happening with you. I thought, oh no, God, no, please don't let it be that. That would be worse than Goose the Moose to start having my periods without my mother. And I was just horrified, but I wasn't getting my period. And a few days before we left, because Nana Joe was very pregnant and there was nothing to do in Clinton, Maryland, but they did have a little tiny little shopping area that had a hardware store, dime store, something or other. And I wanted to buy some souvenirs to take home because I had some money that I hadn't spent. So Nana Joe took me down there and let me shop around. Oh, I can't tell you what a relief that was to get out of the house, to be on my own, to be able to move with some degree of agency and be myself and go somewhere and do something. And I went in the shops, the dime store, and I picked up everything and looked at it. I didn't buy anything that day, though, because I wanted her to bring me back the next day. I was going to tell her I had just been looking because I wanted to get out of the house and I wanted to be on my own and not be stuck in that house where if I went outside, the dog would attack me. So finally, it came that the last day there with Nana Joe and Billy. And I was so excited and I couldn't wait. I was going to spend one last night there with them. And the next morning they were going to take me to my Aunt Dorothy, who also lived in Washington, and she was going to drive me back to Salisbury. So that night I was lying in bed and listening to the radio, and I could not go to sleep because I was so excited. I wanted to get home so bad. I wanted to be back with my friends. I wanted to see my brother. I wanted to see my mother. And I wanted to be able to get on my bike and go somewhere and not be cooped up in the house all day long. And so I was listening to the radio as usual when another popular song came on that night. And that song, I'd heard it many times, but this was the first time I had really, really listened to it. And it affected me deeply. It was that song, Unchained Melody. And it talks about time. And it goes, time goes by so slowly, and time can do so much. And, I thought that described my summer in a way. I felt like time had been going by slowly, and I had wanted it to go by fast. And I had wanted it to do something, can do so much. I had wanted time to change me, to change things, to change my circumstance. And I had an incredible feeling of energetic longing listening to that song. And it wasn't like, it was a longing for becoming, a longing for becoming to be whoever it was I was going to be. It was wanting my life to somehow come out of that chrysalis cocoon thing and for it to be a changed life. And so I felt hopeful in listening to that song. The next morning, Nana, Joe, and Bill took me over to my Aunt Dorothy's, and Billy came along, and I was so excited to be leaving. And Billy, though, was sorry to see me leave. And although I loved him and everything, there's no way in the world I would have stayed behind just for him. But as they were leaving and he saw I wasn't going to get in the car and go back with him, he reached out and grabbed hold of my sleeve. He says, "Moan, Dottie Jean, moan." He couldn't say come on, so he said moan. But the next day, Dorothy and I took off, headed for Salisbury, and I sat in the back seat, but mainly just to be able to just be back there and relax. And there were no interstates, by the way, then. So we came Highway 29 through rural Virginia and on into North Carolina. And I was just counting the miles till I could get home. I so wanted to see my mother. I so much wanted to be back home. The place I had wanted to leave, I couldn't wait to leave. I couldn't wait to get back to. And to pass the time, I did all kinds of things like counting cows or counting the number of cigarettes my aunt smoked. But sitting in the back, it was a crank window on the car, and the knob would spin. And just to pass the time, I tried to turn that knob in sync with the curves as though I were steering the car. Finally, we crossed into North Carolina, and I asked how long it was before we got to Salisbury. Whatever my aunt told me, I can't remember now, but it was way too long. We got into North Carolina a bit. She asked if she saw a place for ice cream. She said, "You want to stop and get some ice cream?" I said, no, keep going, keep going. Finally, we crossed the Yadkin River, and we were close to home, and I was just so thrilled. She pulled up in front of our house, my aunt did. I mean, she hadn't even stopped the car when I went running up our front steps, yelling, "Mama, Mama." And Mama came running out to me, and we fell into each other's arms and walked into the house, leaving my Aunt Dorothy to carry my luggage in. You know, that summer did change me, and it did change my mother a little bit. She did start letting me have some say-so over the clothes I wore. She also let me shave my legs, but only from the knee down. So that if I wore Bermudas, I still had this little fringe hanging out beneath the Bermudas. But the best thing was that I was back with a sense of freedom to do what I wanted to do and be able to go where I wanted to go. I had a lot of freedom. I couldn't pick out my clothes. I couldn't shave my legs, but I could ride my bicycle all over that town, and I could go wherever I wanted to go. And I don't think my mother, it's not that my mother and I always had a smooth relationship after that. We didn't, but we never had those kind of knockdown drag-outs that we had before I left. So I think it accomplished what Mama wanted to accomplish, and that it gave me a sense of appreciation of what I did have at home. So that was my metamorphosis that summer. There have been others, of course. I think I've had one this summer. If you notice my hair, there's a good sign of it. But anyway, so that was one of the trips that changed my life. There is, you know, there's some parts that I'd left out that's affected me, but we have only so much time. But I asked Pat Goss to join us this morning and tell us about a trip that changed her life. So I'll turn it over now to Pat, who will need to unmute herself.
Yeah, okay.
There, yeah.
Okay, well, there's no following a master storyteller. And if I spoke without reading it, I would ad lib and go over my time because I would think of extra things. So I'm going to read you a story since I don't have Dorothy's skill. But the journey that changed my life began in October 1960 in New York City. I was 1 month short of turning 21. My destination was Bombay, India, where I was to marry Eric Goss, who had flown to India to begin his first 5-year term as a missionary. 2 weeks after we became engaged on Ash Wednesday. Nothing like being proposed to by a minister on Ash Wednesday. I was to join him in October after attending a month of missionary orientation for several denominations. That was a great learning experience. My parents, I could elaborate on that a lot. My parents and I arrived in New York City during beautiful fall weather. The United Nations General Assembly was in progress. It was the year Khrushchev banged his shoe on the UN table. We stayed at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel for 2 nights, along with many UN delegates. The lobbies were filled with many persons attired in national dress, enjoying each other's company, and speaking in many different languages, including English. The scene was a feast for the eyes. Bright colors of the women of India dressed in their silk saris. Indian men in jodhpurs, an Indian word, with long coats that came just above their knees. African countries' female representatives dressed in stunning form-fitting batik ankle-length skirts and tight matching jackets. The Latin American delegates spoke a language I knew from my 8 years of living in Mexico, Spanish. I was excited to be traveling to India to be with Eric, but I knew it would be a steep learning curve for me. Eric had been born in India. He was a 3rd-generation Gas missionary. His grandparents were Swiss, and his Swiss-American parents worked in the field of leprosy. Eric had lived in India until he went to the US for university. India's prime minister, the first prime minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, was also staying at the Waldorf. India had been independent only 13 years in 1960, after being the jewel in the English crown from 1757 to 1947. I had the privilege to see Nehru drive away from the Waldorf on the UN. In fact, I opened the door of the hotel for him to exit and followed him to the waiting car at the curb. All the other people hoping to see Nehru were at another door. A doorman had tipped me off at the last minute. I had a Brownie camera and took a picture of Nehru. It was a sunny morning and Nehru leaned forward to smile and wave at me. Both of us are in the picture. I was reflected in the car's window glass. I was thrilled and have read much of Nehru's history and the fight for independence. An Indian doctor friend from Deaconess Hospital, where I had studied nursing, had his brother change his ticket to India from the Queen Mary to the Queen Elizabeth. He said it wasn't proper for me to travel unaccompanied. I learned more about acceptable behavior later in India. Example, when I wanted to accompany Eric to town in the Jeep, he said it wouldn't be wise for us to be seen together before we were married. I was staying with a senior missionary couple who lived in what had been Eric's grandparents' bungalow. They acted as my in loco parentis until the wedding. Eric was staying in the bungalow where we would live after we were married. Back to my departure from the US. At the pier in New York City, my parents were seeing me off. After boarding the ship, passengers all stood looking portside, waving goodbye to those seeing us off. A band was playing, and we were given a packet of 6 streamers. I was unable to throw far enough for my parents to catch my streamers. A bystander on deck gave me his packet. At last, my mother caught my steamer. As the ship sounded its horn, my mother pulled on her side of the streamer and our connection was broken. I gasped, feeling she was breaking our bond. It took 3 weeks' time before her letter arrived telling me her breaking the connection was to mean that she was sending me off with her blessing to begin my new life in India. I wouldn't see her for another 2+ years when she came for a month visit when our first child was born. At dinner, that first night on the Queen Elizabeth, I was seated with an English couple, all very formal. When dessert came, it was ice cream. I was disappointed in its taste and interested to hear the British couple say to each other, "Isn't it wonderful to finally again taste some good British ice cream?" A first lesson. I learned a lot in those 5 days at sea, being with many people of different nationalities again since our return from Mexico in 1954. Arriving in Southampton, we had a 3-day layover in London before we had to go back to Southampton to sail on a smaller ship to Bombay. While in London, my first visit, I was struck by how different the stores were. They sold shampoos, laundry soap, butter, and milk in very small containers. I suddenly felt very self-conscious about the large containers in the US. Was it because they walked to the store and back and carried things in their bags? Had they not recovered from the war? At Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park, where people could get up and speak until booed or cheered off the stump, Indian immigrants were selling hot tea in chipped china cups and washing them by dipping them in a bucket of soapy water and then a bucket of clear water for rinsing. Very different from park stalls in the US. I suddenly felt ill at ease about economic life in London so long after the war. When the Indian doctor who had changed his ticket and I went off to the Tower of London, we saw the jewels and the crown. He said loudly, "The British stole those jewels from India." Everyone circling the glassed enclosure turned and looked at us. Over the years, I've read many books and novels learning about Indian history. At the guest house where we stayed in London, I was given a hot water bottle at night to sleep to keep my feet warm. I don't think we had central heat. When I went to have a bath in the communal bathroom, I had to put a coin in the water tank to have hot water to bathe. It was very different from the comforts of Mexico and the US to which I was accustomed. I felt very sorry for what the British had suffered during the war. When we took the train in London back to Southampton, I tipped the porter what I thought was appropriate. He threw the money at my feet and said, "That won't buy me a cup of tea," and walked off. I felt embarrassed and ashamed. On the ship to Bombay, the RMS Canton, built in Scotland in 1938, it carried about 500 passengers equally divided between first and second class. I was in second class and had a female cabin mate. Passengers were mostly English or Indian, with mostly Indian crew, apart from the captain. I found myself the only non-Indian at our dining table. There were 8 of us. One couple was from North India. He was a diplomat. There were several South Indians at the table. I learned a great deal about how North and South Indians felt about each other. Conversation was in English, the link language. They ate Indian style. The North Indians, with the tips of their fingers, they teased the South Indians about scooping up food using their whole hand. The big Hindu festival of lights, Diwali, was celebrated while we were on the ship. I was dressed up by one of my table mates in a brief blouse and sari. They told me since I was wearing a sari for my wedding, I better start practicing. They were very appreciative of me wearing a sari. I learned a great deal at that table about Indian history, politics, nonviolence, violent protests, tolerance, caste, different religions and customs. We also went through the Suez Canal, which was exciting. It began a new adventure in my life that lasted 25 years, and I am still enriched by all I learned in India. When finally, after 12 days, we arrived in Bombay, passing the Gateway of India, built to commemorate the visit of King Emperor George V and Queen Mary Empress in 1911, the first British monarch to visit India, all of us were crowded dockside. All my friends wanted to see this Eric I would be marrying, to see if he really existed. I was wearing a blue suit, stockings, and high heels. It was hot. Suddenly, I was engulfed in an embrace with Eric saying, "Welcome, sweetheart." My friends gave me the equivalent of a thumbs up and I introduced them. Eric spoke in English and Hindi to the North Indians and spoke some Tamil to the South Indians. Before we left Bombay for the 24-hour train ride to central provinces where we would live, we had lunch with the Indian doctor's family, the one who had changed his ticket. His brother also met us at the pier, and I obliged him, as he said, by taking along as my property a big transistor radio he was bringing in. No duty had to be paid by me, and that was a time when one had to pay duty. I had to buy a white silk wedding sari, as opposed to red saris, which are worn by Hindu brides. Mine didn't have as much gold on the border or in the part draped over my shoulder as most Indian brides. I also had to buy some sandals. Out of respect for what our income would be, I only bought a black everyday pair so as not to appear a spendthrift. I ended up wearing them under my white sari because no white sandals were available in Raipur, where we were to reside. Also, because here I'm drifting, the saris were 52 inches long. Eric's mother was short. She didn't realize, I was 5'7.5" at the time, that people my side had to put an addition at the top that you tucked into your petticoat. So I said, I don't want any picture below my knees because they'll see the black sandals. At lunch with the doctor's brother, I admired a framed picture of 2 bunny rabbits made of rolled cotton studded with steel small pearls in the living room. It had been made by the hostess. After our lunch, as we got ready to leave, I noticed a white empty square on the wall. When we got to the door, I was handed a wrapped package. It contained the artwork I had admired. It hung in our children's nursery ever after. I learned how to avoid admiring things too much for fear it would be given to me. Departing Bombay, the architectural wonder Victoria train terminus, we boarded a 6-berth compartment with attached bathroom. I traveled with 5 men. I said I would take a top bunk. Eric took a top bunk opposite mine. I said, "What do I do about pajamas?" He told me I could use his. I changed in the bathroom, crawled up to my top bunk, turned my face to the wall in embarrassment, banging my knee in the process. When we reached Nagpur, 6 hours by train from Raipur, our final destination, Eric's mother and her sister boarded the train to accompany us as chaperones on the last lap of the 24-hour journey. It wasn't really proper for Eric to go meet me in Bombay, but he held his ground. He should have had a chaperone along. So his mother and visiting aunt had come from south to Nagpur to accompany us to our destination. They stayed with Eric at his bungalow until the wedding. Eric's father came later for the wedding as he was a professor at Christian Medical College, Vellore, 2 nights away by train. It was our only arrival or departure where we were not greeted or sent off by friends and colleagues, giving us many fragrant garlands. It just wasn't seemly for me to be traveling with Eric before we were married. And then there was our wedding, 2 weeks later, with me in my sari and Eric in his white jacket he had bought at a thrift shop for 25 cents. And all the missionaries present, as the next day was the annual meeting of the UCC missionaries, followed by Thanksgiving. It was held in the big St. Paul's Church, filled with many mission leaders and many members of the church, and at a time before school let out. That was very important, they said. But the honeymoon in a forest guest house located in a tribal village, much studied by anthropologists, is another story. And the experiences of those 25 enriching years are as real to me as yesterday. And here is a picture of the bride and the groom. And I managed not to show my black sandals. So that's my story. And sorry, I couldn't just say it. I often do snitches at drinks before dinner for guests, but I just knew I would overgo my time. So thank you, Dottie, Jean, for inviting me to do
Well,
this.
thank you. Thank you. That was wonderful. Thanks very much. There was one detail that I had heard that made me intrigued by this story, but you didn't mention.
What's that?
It's that you traveled with a refrigerator.
Oh, I had all my baggage. I was told by Eric, you need to bring a refrigerator. They weren't selling them in Raipur, even though it was a district capital, and the 100,000 people were there. I had to bring all sorts of things at his request.
Wow.
So that honeymoon in the forest bungalow, but Eric preferred to sleep outside, and there was only one sleeping bag. That was miserable. And we had to cook over an open fire, and Eric's mother had an oatmeal tin. And so I said, I'll make oatmeal for breakfast. Well, I said, this doesn't look like any oatmeal I've seen. And Eric smelled the contents, and he said, oh, this is atta. This is flour. And I said, being a nurse, well, why didn't your mother label the tin with what was in it? I was just reading the label. But anyway, I had to bring many things. And that honeymoon in the forest got interrupted by a telegram that said, come to Nagpur immediately. Your unaccompanied baggage is ready to clear customs, and they charge per day. So then we went to Bombay to clear all those things. And we stayed in a hotel that had a shared bathroom, but it looked out on the cricket court, and there was cricket going between India and Pakistan, I think, at the time. So my stories are different from many people's stories.
Gosh, that's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody have any questions? If so, unmute yourself or anything you'd like to add or anything? Okay.
I loved your story, Dottie Jean.
Yeah.
I have a granddaughter who is 12, going on 16, as her mother says. And she has inherited her father's and her grandfather's hairy arms and hairy legs. And the women in the family just wonder, when is she going to become aware of this, and what is she going to do about it?
Yeah. The hair on my arms is hardly noticeable now, but when I was in the second grade, I noticed I was the only little girl that had hair on my arms. And
I know.
I was so horrified, and I went and told my mother about it. And she said, well, I have hairy arms too, and they're beautiful. You have arms just like I do. So
Well, the other
I didn't worry about it.
your story was how eager you were to go, and then how eager you were to.
Oh, yeah.
When I went to camp at about the same age, I kind of waved my parents off. And then there's a picture of me running like this with open arms and tears streaming down my eyes 2 weeks later when they came to get me.
Yeah, that was it.
Of them then.
Okay, thank y'all. Thank you. Nancy?